PR Connections Radio presents
to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. And on this Throwback Tuesday, we are going to be taking a look at the best season in Henderson Silver Knights history. Now, this is going to be going back to the 2020-2021 season. This is right when the COVID-19 pandemic was going on, was in full effect. And it's very interesting that when you watch videos from this 2020-2021 season, just how bizarre and how weird it looks. But when we were doing the research for this video and trying to come up with this Throwback Tuesday kind of idea, this is really piggybacking off of Monday's video where we spoke about the Las Vegas Wranglers and them making the Kelly Cup in 2007-2008. And I just want to take this video, take this half hour that we're in the studio, and I want to talk about how the 2020-2021 Henderson Silver Knights team was the best team that the Henderson Silver Knights have ever had. I also want to kind of talk about the fact that this is their debut season being a Henderson Silver Knights organization. And more importantly, highlight some key players who were on this team that are with the Vegas Golden Knights right here, right now. So it's going to be a very fun episode, and I'm looking forward to doing this with all of you. Now, to set this up correctly, let's give you the context on this best season, because I briefly said that this was the first season in Henderson Silver Knights history, and that is correct. This is the first year that the Henderson Silver Knights would be a unit in the American Hockey League. And how did this happen? Well, the Henderson Silver Knights, the Vegas Golden Knights did have an AHL affiliate the first 3 seasons of them being in the NHL, but it wasn't the Henderson Silver Knights. It was the Chicago Wolves. Now, Chicago Wolves, who are a mainstay, a long-tenured team in the AHL, still a active organization in the AHL to this day, they decided, the Vegas Golden Knights, they were not going to be with the organization anymore. The Chicago Wolves were going to do their own thing. Vegas was going to do their thing. And I'm using the Las Vegas Review-Journal and the Las Vegas Sun for really my reference on these ones. On February 6th, 2020, the Vegas Golden Knights and Bill Foley would buy the San Antonio Rampage of the American Hockey League. Now, the San Antonio Rampage had no affiliation with the Vegas Golden Knights. They were somebody else's AHL affiliate entirely. As a matter of fact, in that 2019-2020 season, they were with the St. Louis Blues. And, they would have, some players from the Colorado Avalanche. They would be there as well. But the San Antonio Rampage would sell the team to Bill Foley. And what would happen is that when Bill Foley bought the team, the sole purpose of it was to move it into the state of Nevada. Now, there was some speculation where in Nevada would it be, but then it would be announced late in February that it would be improved by the AHL, and the purchase and relocation was actually approved by the league, and they would have to play at the Orleans Arena in Las Vegas. Now, the Orleans Arena, I spoke about that in a lot of detail on Monday's episode. For anybody who are Las Vegas Wranglers fans, you know how valuable and how important the Orleans Arena was into the state of hockey here in Las Vegas. And the Orleans Arena getting their second chance to host hockey in that 2020-2021 season. And it wasn't until a couple of months later that even the name of the Henderson Silver Knights they would end up being named. Now, there was some questioning on if they're being called the Henderson Silver Knights, but they're playing downtown, they're playing on the Strip. What does that mean exactly? What is the reasoning for why they are going to be playing at the Orleans Arena, but they're going to be called the Henderson Silver Knights? Well, it would be announced later in that 2020 season that they would have a brand new state-of-the-art AHL arena that would be built in Henderson, and it would be for the Silver Knights. It would be essentially an exclusive organization, and it would be built for mostly the Silver Knights. Now we all know that became the Dollar Loan Center that we all love and all know and love now. I also want to mention that the start of the season was delayed. And the reason why the start of the 2020 season was delayed for the Henderson Silver Knights was because something I mentioned briefly in the intro of the show, the COVID-19 pandemic. So the Vegas Golden Knights had some time to actually get everything sorted and get everything properly done. In the middle of August, they would hire their first ever head coach in franchise history. And I'll get more into him in just a second. But I also want to mention that they were building up that roster of AHL players. They were sending some guys down from Vegas, down to Henderson to start the season. And on February 6th, 2021, the Henderson Silver Knights would play their first ever game. Now, the title of the video is looking at their best season. I could technically call it the 2021 season, just like in the NHL, they played majority of the campaign in 2021, but yet it's called the 2020-2021 season, just like if you go on the website, it would be the 2020-2021 AHL season. But they played that 2020-2021 calendar year. They played just under 40 games that year because of the postponed season. That makes sense. Just like the NHL only played 56 games that year compared to the 82 games. And how did the Henderson Silver Knights do in that year? Well, I'm going to get into that in just a second. So once the regular season would wrap up in May of 2021, only, a couple of months was this season, just like, with the NHL. I did mention how it mostly started in January and the whole season wrapped up essentially by May. In the 40-game season, 39 games really, the Henderson Silver Knights in their first campaign in the 2020-2021 season, they would pick up 25 wins on the year. So 25 out of 39 games for the Henderson Silver Knights. They would have 13 regular season losses and one overtime loss. That would be for the Henderson Silver Knights. They did pick up 51 points on the year, and I am using the AHL.com, and I'm using their standings as my reference point. And very interesting how they scored points in over 65% of the season. Now, if we do factor that into the regular about 68 games the AHL normally does, that would be a fantastic season for the Henderson Silver Knights. That was a full 68 games. I also want to mention that their goals for versus goals and against, the Vegas Golden Knights were plus 23. I'm talking about their AHL affiliate. The Henderson Silver Knights were plus 23. And for the first time in franchise history, and actually, unfortunately, the only time in franchise history, the Henderson Silver Knights would end the regular season with the Pacific Division win. All right, they would be the winners of the Pacific Division in the AHL. Now, I did mention that 51 points because if you look at the whole rest of the league, nobody else had more points than them. I do want to say the Hershey Bears and the Laval Rocket, they were at 50 points on the year, but nobody got to 51, unlike Henderson. So them having the best record in the Pacific, that's great. Having the best record in the AHL was great. And I also am going to point out is that there was a few players on this team that were putting up stellar numbers for the Henderson Silver Knights. And the guy that really stood out, and I would say your MVP of the entire Henderson Silver Knights that year, would end up becoming somebody that the Vegas Golden Knights fans would get to know in a few years' time, and has been one of the best goalies in the NHL. And of course, I'm talking about the MVP of the Vegas Golden Knights this past year, and that's Logan Thompson. Logan Thompson, in just 23 games played, I'm using his hockey reference for this one, he would play with a 1.96 goals against average. He would have 16 wins, 6 losses, and 1 overtime loss, and would pick up a save percentage over 94%. That was a great season by Logan Thompson in the AHL. As a matter of fact, he would be second in the entire AHL that year when it came to goals against average, and he'd be one of the league leaders in wins. So that was very fascinating. I like what we saw from Logan Thompson that year, and he really built himself as the MVP of the Silver Knights in that season, and then a few years later would be the MVP of the Golden Knights this past year. Now, from a player's perspective, Jack Dugan, he had 33 points in 37 games. This was his kind of breakout year with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. Now, unfortunately, his following year, he would not put up the same numbers, and that would be the end of his tenure with the Vegas Golden Knights, and he is in the ECHL, still playing to this day. But yeah, Jack Dugan was actually one among the league leaders in terms of the Henderson Silver Knights this year. Defensively, Ryan Murphy, who was a former top 15 pick a few years back, when he spent his only season being with the Vegas Golden Knights organization, he would pick up 27 points in 37 games. And then some other players that I do want to mention, the goal leader for the Henderson Silver Knights was Danny O'Regan. And Danny O'Regan, this was someone that they acquired. He was only on a 1-year situation with the Silver Knights, and he did make it count because after that one season, he went over to Anaheim and even played some NHL games with the Anaheim Ducks the year afterwards. Some other notable guys, Paul Cotter, the 20-year-old at the time, he did have 5 goals in 38 games for the Henderson Silver Knights. Of course, you also had some guys that were with the Vegas Golden Knights organization that did have a little bit of a role here. I want to talk about Gage Quinney, who hit the 10-goal mark for the Silver Knights. You also had Giannis Roundbeer. You had Cody Glass. You had Jimmy Shaholt, Carl Dahlstrom, Benjamin Jones. There was a bunch of young guys on this team. And a fun fact about this Henderson Silver Knights roster, they did not have anybody on this team that was over the age of 28, which is incredible. The only veteran on this team was an AHL veteran in Patrick Brown, who was named the first captain in Henderson Silver Knights history. He actually would play for the Vegas Golden Knights for 2 seasons, off and on as a rotation kind of player. And he was the oldest player there. Now, something I want to mention is the amount of penalty minutes that the Henderson Silver Knights had, because the leader in that was a 22-year-old player from Jamaica in Jermaine Luen. And he did not score any goals. He rarely put up any points, but he racked up over 55 penalty minutes in that 2020-2021 season. And then he also went on to continue playing for the Henderson Silver Knights for the next 2 seasons afterwards, and would rack up 80-plus penalty minutes in those following years. I do believe he's still in the AHL right now, playing for the Canucks, if I do recall. So, very fascinating that 2020-2021 season, Danny O'Regan had the goal leader. Jack Dugan was the assist leader. Then you had, for points, Ryan Murphy was the leader in defenseman. Jermaine Luen was the leader in penalty minutes. And defenseman Zachary Hayes was the leader in plus-minus with a plus 16, which is very good for him. So there is something else I do want to mention, because he did have a big part in this. Now, when it comes to coaches, I understand that there are people who sometimes overlook minor league coaches. But on this episode, I do want to acknowledge the head coach of the Silver Knights here, the first coach in franchise history, because he did have a good role on this organization. Manny Viveros, I mean, this was a head coach who, before he got to the AHL, before he got to be with the Henderson Silver Knights for a couple of seasons, he was a coach that was over in Austria. He had coached the Austria national team, but he had never really been a head coach at the AHL level. He gets his first ever opportunity to be an AHL coach, and he would be with the Silver Knights organization. Now, he only spent a couple of years with the Henderson Silver Knights building up this roster. And after the Henderson Silver Knights would miss the playoffs at the end of 2023, he would mutually part ways with the Silver Knights organization. The Golden Knights tenure would come to an end. And he is actually in the Western Hockey League now, being the head coach of Vancouver. So he is in the junior hockey scene as of now. But I mean, he does have a good role to play here. When you do have the best record in the AHL, and he did get some good usage out of everybody that was on this roster, so I wanted to acknowledge him and say when it comes to Manny Viveros, this is a coach that is a good part of this 2020-2021 roster, and I like what we saw from him. He did a really good job here in that inaugural season with the Henderson Silver Knights. So moving past that, okay, well, what would happen come playoff time? With the playoffs, what would happen here? Well, because it was the COVID-19 pandemic, and this was still in that time frame where a bunch of things were going on, there was a bunch of anomalies and unknowns that were happening, the Henderson Silver Knights, they would not be able to play in the Calder Cup playoffs. The Henderson Silver Knights would never get an opportunity to win the Calder Cup in 2021, as it would be canceled that season. But what would end up happening is that the AHL would make a decision, that the AHL would decide to have a Pacific Division playoff, where the 7 best teams in the Pacific Division, they would participate for a Calder Cup playoff. However, it would not be called the Calder Cup playoff, as it actually would be called the John D. Chick Trophy. So the John D. Chick Trophy, that is what they would fight for in that postseason. Now, with them having the number 1 seed in this tournament, the Henderson Silver Knights would get to the semifinals and take on the San Jose Barracuda, who are the affiliate of the San Jose Sharks. Now, what is fascinating about that is that you're playing at the Orleans Arena, and it would be a 2-0 sweep by the Henderson Silver Knights, as this would be a best-of-3 series. And the first game on May 21st, and I'm using archived articles for this one, the Henderson Silver Knights would play at the Orleans Arena, and they would win a 4-1 victory over San Jose. Logan Thompson would be in net that night, and he had 22 saves out of 23 shots. Jack Dugan would have a hat trick on the night, and Pavel Dorofeyev, who is really establishing himself as a Vegas Golden Knight now, when he was playing in 2020, 2021, he was this fresh-faced, just, one of the bright new stars of the Henderson Silver Knights. He would score a goal in this game. Now, the next day, May 22nd, at the Orleans Arena, and Logan Thompson, he would be back in net for the Henderson Silver Knights, and he would put up 30 saves on the night in a really good victory for the Silver Knights. They would have a 4-2 victory, and they would sweep the Barracuda. Now, Gage Quinney would score a goal here. Danny O'Regan would have a 2-goal night for the Silver Knights, and that would be a sweep for them. And on the opposite side, you would have the Bakersfield Condors, who are with the Edmonton Oilers, and the San Diego Gulls of the Anaheim Ducks. And after a 3-game battle, the Bakersfield Condors would end up winning that series and advancing to the finals. So for the first time in franchise history, you would have the Henderson Silver Knights advancing to the finals of the AHL. Now, I understand that this was not the same as a normal final, but this is still a final nonetheless. So for the 2021 John D. Chick Trophy, which would be for the Pacific Division, the Bakersfield Condors would take on the Henderson Silver Knights, and you would have a location change as the T-Mobile Arena would be used for the finals, and the Vegas Golden Knights would allow the Silver Knights and the Condors to use this one. So the Edmonton Oilers and Vegas Golden Knights essentially playing a 3-game playoff just in the AHL. Now, Game 1 would be on May 26th, and Logan Thompson would put up a really stellar night, having 35 saves on 38 shots. And funny enough, the goalie that would be opposite of him is a mainstay in the NHL now, and that's Stuart Skinner. So Stuart Skinner and Logan Thompson have been having battles for the last 2 years. Well, they were having battles even before that. It was just in the AHL. And the Bakersfield Condors would win in overtime 3-2. Adam Cracknell, the former Las Vegas Wrangler, who I talked about on the Monday episode, he would have a 2-goal night, and he would actually score the overtime winner for the Condors to make it a 1-0 series. I also do want to briefly mention that when it comes to the Henderson Silver Knights, Benjamin Jones would have his first goal of the postseason, and Pavel Dorofeyev would actually tie the game up for the Silver Knights, and he would actually have a second goal of the postseason. And 3-2 loss in overtime in Game 1. But Game 2 at T-Mobile Arena, Logan Thompson once again back in net, and the Silver Knights would have a rampage of goals as they would pick up a 6-3 victory, as you would have a 2-goal performance by Jonas Roundbeer, you would have a 2-goal performance by Dylan Sakura, and you would actually have an empty net goal by Danny O'Regan. So very fascinating how the Henderson Silver Knights were putting up all these really good scores here. And Stuart Skinner would actually get pulled in this game after only 11 saves on 15 shots. Logan Thompson would have 21 saves on the night for Henderson. And you have Rachiele Lavoie, Tyler Benson would be 2-goal scorers for the Henderson Silver Knights and Bakersfield Condors. And what's interesting is that Tyler Benson just played for the Silver Knights this past year. Like, Tyler Benson had a 25-point season for the Silver Knights in 2023, 2024, and he did score a goal in this final for the Bakersfield Condor. Kind of funny how everything comes back together. So, Game 3, the do-or-die game for the Silver Knights and the Condors at T-Mobile Arena on May 29th. And there would be the same goalies, Stuart Skinner for Edmonton, Henderson Silver Knights for Vegas. You have Henderson and Bakersfield going at it to win the John D. Chick Trophy. And in the first period at T-Mobile Arena, there would be no scoring. There would be not much fanfare there. But in the second period, you would have the first goal be put on the board by the Henderson Silver Knights as Dylan Sakura. He would end up getting his third goal of the postseason and would be his third goal in 2 games for the Henderson Silver Knights. And this would be before the Bakersfield Condors would have back-to-back goals in the second period to make it a 2-1 game at the end of the second period. And then in the third period, Caden Korzak, who has, have been a mainstay on this channel, I've talked about him positively a lot on this show, he would get his first goal of the postseason and tie it up at 2 for the Silver Knights. And unfortunately for the Golden Knights organization and for the AHL affiliate Henderson Silver Knights, this would end up being the only high note of that third period, as Tyler Benson, who I mentioned became a Henderson Silver Knight this past year, he would get his third goal of the postseason, and he would get right past Logan Thompson. And just like that, the buzzer would go 0 inside of T-Mobile Arena, and the Bakersfield Condors would win the 2021 John D. Chick Trophy. They would win the finals in the Pacific Division, and the Henderson Silver Knights would come up second place in the playoffs that year in the 2021 season. Now, Logan Thompson, he had 29 saves in that do-or-die Game 3, and Bakersfield ended up winning that year. Now, when it comes to the awards in the AHL that season, now I understand that the Calder Cup was not awarded, but the John D. Chick Trophy was awarded to Edmonton. But there was some awards that did go to the Silver Knights that year. Defenseman Ryan Murphy would get the Best Defenseman in the AHL award. So for Ryan Murphy, who eventually would move on to another organization, he would get the Best Defenseman award. Now, the best goaltender in the AHL would go to Logan Thompson, and it really shows how he was the MVP of the Silver Knights in that shortened 2020-2021 season. And the athletic trainer the Henderson Silver Knights had, him alongside all the athletic trainers in the AHL, they would get the AHL's Man of the Year award. So that was really cool. The fact that the athletic trainers got the Man of the Year award, really kind of showing the spotlighting, what the AHL was doing at that time. And I will say, when it comes to what happened in the AHL that season, you would go to the All-Star game, which would essentially be their classification of the All-Star rosters because it wasn't played that year. But in the Pacific Division, you would have Ryan Murphy and Logan Thompson that would get named to the Pacific Division All-Stars. So that was good for them, both being on the All-Star team. And Logan Thompson would also be named to the All-Rookie team as the goaltender for the Silver Knights. So that is really taking a look back at what the AHL season was with the Silver Knights. Now, for anybody who's been paying attention to the Silver Knights since that 2021 season, the past 3 years have been unfortunately not that great. 2021, 2022, they would finish 6th in the Pacific. They would be in the play-in tournament for the AHL playoffs that year, and they would get swept by the Colorado Eagles. And then 2022, 2023, they would miss the playoffs. And then this past year, they would miss the playoffs. So, back-to-back playoff misses for the Silver Knights, and a play-in was all they did in year 2. But, 4 years in being the Silver Knights, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. Season 5 is going to be just up around the corner, and we will have to wait and see what they do there. But yeah, I just wanted to take this Throwback Tuesday and just kind of wanted to make this video for you guys and really discuss what I believe is a very important thing, and that is that the Henderson Silver Knights, they did have their best season. It's just unfortunately during a COVID-19 pandemic where the Calder Cup was not played. Now, if you're going to ask me what I think would have happened if the Calder Cup was played, I believe that they would have made it to at least the 3rd round, okay? In a normal Calder Cup situation, all right? If anybody who understands the bracket of the Calder Cup, the Western Conference standings, I truly believe that they would have made it to the conference finals that year because it was really them and Bakersfield were the 2 best teams in the Pacific Division that year. And then when you saw the standings of the Central Division, the Chicago Wolves didn't even crack 50 points that year. And there really wasn't anybody in the Central Division that had a lot of points. I think the Iowa Wild may have even had around 40 points that year. So I will say confidently that if the Calder Cup would have been played, I say the Silver Knights would have made it to at least the conference final. So, just wanted to record this video for this Throwback Tuesday. And until next time, continue watching hockey. Go support junior hockey. And go Knights, go.
PR Connections Radio thanks you for watching this podcast. Check out more episodes of this show and our others at prconnectionsradio.com.